Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We now explore the West African island nation country of Cape Verde or Cape Verde, and who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and anti-imperialist activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and also frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Cape Verde's history and current affairs. So, Abayomi, first off, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for your ongoing interest in African affairs.
No problem. Always an honor to have you, and a real privilege to have you as our history teacher, Abayomi. And as always, my thanks and appreciation for the time you give us. And before we talk about Cape Verde, as always, folks, please help One Plus One by sharing widely our content. Luckily, the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've not been experiencing any suppression, but you never know. So, in the events that Facebook limits again how much I can share and post, please share widely One Plus One across your social media and emails, and in general, people sharing widely is the only way we can grow our audience and hopefully get regular donations. So please share, and as always, because Abayomi is always very generous with his time. Please, folks, donate generously to Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports, and please donate generously if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present. Help us overcome the far-right algorithms and help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and state media has in the social media world by sharing One Plus One's content, and again, donating to us. And actually, before we get to the topic at hand, which is Cape Verde, Abayomi, recently, Africa was in the news, a little bit in the news. There were recent elections in Cameroon. Now, very unclear if the West's favorite puppet, Paul Biya, lost or won. The leading opposition claims they won, but nothing's been verified. There's not yet been any incidents of clashing going on between Paul Biya's his pro-government forces and the opposition. Is there anything you can tell us about what's going on with the recent Cameroon elections before we talk about Cape Verde? I'm very
As
curious.
you mentioned, the opposition parties, one of them said that Paul Biya should just step down and allow other forces to take over the country. It appears, with all the reports that have been coming out, that he's leading in the elections. So he's 92 years old. So he would, of course, is and will continue to be the oldest president in the world. I think this is another 6 or 7 year term of office. So theoretically, if he's declared the winner of this election and there's no widespread opposition or other means of denying him the right to take office, he'll be almost 100 years old when his term is over. I think 99 years old. So that is phenomenal. And considering all the problems that Cameroon has, the divisions between the English-speaking areas and the French-speaking areas, and of course the insurgency that's going on there to create a new nation among those who were previously colonized by England, they need strong political leadership. And I don't know if Paul Biya can provide that strong political leadership going forward.
And actually, and folks, if folks are interested, we covered Cameroon several years, not several years ago, several weeks ago.
Right.
We covered Cameroon with Abayomi, so folks should definitely check that out if they want to understand everything and anything they need to know. A very good crash course into Cameroon's history and current affairs. Now, let's say okay, let's say Paul Biya does step down peacefully or peacefully or violently. I hope peacefully, and the opposition or the leading opposition candidate becomes president. I mean, is he a leftist or at least left leaning that hopefully he would be allowed to do much needed policies to help out the poor majority, or we don't really know yet, given how fragmented African politics is and how fragmented even the left is in our beloved continent.
As you said, it's not really clear if he does not prevail in the count of the votes. And it remains to be seen what any new leadership will do. One thing they do need to do is to call together all the other viable opposition parties to try to draft a new political dispensation going forward. They need to move towards ending the Civil War, and they need to correct the corruption and inefficiency that's going on in government, where people are in dire straits to make an honest living. And civil servants several years ago had worked for years with no pay, particularly in the education sector.
Wow.
So all these problems need to be worked out going forward. That is, if Paul Biya steps down or is not declared the winner of the elections. But he's been in office now for approximately 40 years, and he has no intentions of leaving.
Unbelievable. Well, and hopefully any new government that does give the wages, the just basic wages that are owed to people who work in the public sector and so forth, or even decide why not raise the minimum wage, our pitiful, almost non-existent minimum wage, to somewhat of a living standard to keep up with the standard of living. Hopefully, France and Western imperialists don't overthrow that government like they've done with Haiti, but that's a
Yeah,
another topic for another day, but that can happen. That can happen. That is
it
the
can.
problem with Western imperialism.
And look what they're doing in Venezuela right now. They've been attacking these boats off the shore in the Caribbean Sea, and they have ordered CIA destabilization efforts, which have been going on well over 2 decades already. So there's this extreme threat that there could be some type of airstrike or an assassination attempt against the top leadership in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We mentioned last week that they had made the quote leading unquote opposition figure as the Nobel Peace Prize winner for 2025. This is outrageous. This is someone who supports the genocide that's going on in occupied Palestine. They're nothing but puppets of US imperialism. So, how can they bring peace to Venezuela? What have they done to contribute to the stability and well being of the people in Venezuela? Absolutely nothing. But it shows where the Nobel Committee is, where it has been, and unfortunately, where it's going in the future.
Exactly. And, you know, believe it or not, actually do believe this. There are foolish people who dare call themselves left wing or left leaning that want to overthrow the Venezuelan government and support Juan Guaido and Machado. But I just want to make it very, very perfectly clear, and not to say, and yes, I am going to sound condescending, and I am going to speak to them as if they're a child, but she was on Donald Trump Jr.'s far right douchebag program on Rumble. Rumble and Rockfin is overpopulated, by the way, with far right content, and she literally, okay, it's bad enough. It's bad enough that she supports the economic terrorism, or what people
Yes.
call sanctions on her country, which I believe Alfred Desaias and Alina Dohan, another special UN rapporteur on the impact of sanctions, both have said that the sanctions on Venezuela have costed the lives of numbers that you literally can compare to the genocidal embargo that was placed on Iraq after the Gulf War.
Yes.
So we're talking about 1,000 or more people who have died as a result of economic terrorism, basically. And so it's bad enough that she supports that. It
Right.
is bad enough that she supports that. It's bad enough that she even supports Donald Trump and the West invading her own country and stuff like that. But if that doesn't scare people enough, if that doesn't scare people enough, if that doesn't move people enough to join the anti-imperialist movement, when she was on Donald Trump Jr.'s program, she literally said if she was in power, she would privatize everything. She would privatize all of the oil and so forth. We would allow all Western businesses to come and we would privatize all of that. And if what more do you need? You know, like what more
Exactly.
do you need to show that she is a far right neo colonial imperialist tool.
Exactly. And you talk about privatization of the oil industry, they've already stolen U.S. imperialism. Citgo Corporation, which is a multi-billion-dollar oil corporation, and they pretty much nationalized it in the interest of imperialism in the United States and taking all their assets. So they're owed tremendous amounts of money and reparations as well from the United States.
Unbelievable. And yeah, I mean the Nobel Peace. I mean, yeah, and I'll just say that the Nobel, you know, the West has never had credibility, but there are lots of Western chauvinists, even amongst left-leaning people, who think that the West, once upon a time, or that the European Union is going to be this force of good in the world if only evil like America like did exist and so forth. But I find like the Gaza genocide should already smash that
Yes,
myth. That should already smash the myth that the West has no credibility. It's never had credibility. But just the fact that with the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the fact that that again the Nobel Committee has awarded the Peace Prize to this far right to this far right loon. I mean, anyways, the West has no credibility. It's time for even those among those on the left to wake up to that and join and join the real resistance in the global South and join really radical anti-imperialist and true radical left movements to address all of that. So
exactly.
and yeah, and that's my 2 cents on
All right.
it. So all right. So now on to the topic at hand, looking at the history and current affairs of Cape Verde or Cape Verde. So Abayomi, as always, tell us what was Cape Verde like before it became a Portuguese colony, and when it was a Portuguese colony, what were the conditions of the people like from the classical colonial period of Portuguese monarch to the fascist dictatorship that the Portuguese and the colonies of Portugal were under until the 1970s. Yeah, take it away from there.
Well, in regard to the origins of the Cape Verde Islands, which are like an archipelago of 10 islands shaped somewhat as a horseshoe in terms of its geography, uh, it's an area that can be traced back 30 to 40 million years in terms of its formation. It's claimed by geologists that many of the islands were volcanic in their origins. Nonetheless, what I found problematic in regard to the history of the Cape Verde Islands is that the European historians say that they were uninhabited prior to the advent of Portuguese colonialism and enslavement of Africans. Now, this has been said about other geopolitical regions, about other territories. For example, the Chagos Islands, formerly known as Diego Garcia,
Yeah,
was a British military outpost, and it was leased to the United States during the Vietnam War and has been used by the United States in their numerous wars that have taken place over the last 6 decades. They're claiming that on Diego Garcia, that there were no inhabitants prior to the intervention of the British. So I think more research needs to be done on this question. Nonetheless, the Portuguese went there during the middle of the 15th century. Their explorers were sent there. And during that time period, they were looking for outposts for trade and shipping, as well as a base for the transport of Africans who were enslaved to Europe initially and then eventually to the Western Hemisphere. So the Cape Verde Islands became a major hub during the Atlantic slave trade, not only for human trafficking, but also for the importation and export of commodities and agricultural products. And this went on from about the mid 1400s all the way into the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, the 1800s. And of course, this history is tied in with the history of the mainland, which is known as Guinea-Bissau. They were part
Yeah.
of the Portuguese colonial empire, and that is the history of Cape Verde Islands. There, they exported, brought in and exported a lot of Africans for the purpose of enslavement. There was a lot of interracial, forced sexual exploitation of African women. So the population there is heavily mixed race, but it's not by choice. It's a direct result of the legacy of colonialism and enslavement. So that is very, very important for people to understand that the people there have been subjected for nearly 6 centuries to enslavement and later colonialism, and today neocolonialism.
Wow. And how did the island nation become independent? And was it one of violent struggle or peaceful transition of power? And then and then from there, tell us about the first years of Cape Verde's independence under the president Aristide Pereira of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, and then just the African Party for Independence of Cape Verde, and his prime minister was Pedro Perez of the same political parties. So that's 8th of July 1975 to March 22nd, 1991 was how long Aristide was in not the Haitian, the Portuguese Aristide, was in office with his prime minister. How do you assess their legacy? Both of these parties are supposed to be left-wing parties, members of Socialist International, which I've discussed many times what that organization is and how flawed that organization has been. So that said, please do give your overall assessment of this government when it was in power, both on Cape Verde's domestic socioeconomics and their foreign policy.
It's important to look at the history of Portugal domestically. As we talked about in earlier episodes, the country was largely controlled by a fascist government from the 1930s all the way up until 1974. Salazar and then later Caetano were fascist leaders, and they viewed the overseas Portuguese territories as part of the administrative and economic purview of the Portuguese colonialists. Not only were they colonialists, they were fascists. They did not tolerate any type of democratic practice. And this had a lot to do with how the struggle developed in Cape Verde, as well as the mainland of Guinea-Bissau. After World War II, well, first of all, in the 19th century, with the decline of the Atlantic slave trade, when you had the transition from the Atlantic slave trade to classical colonialism, the island lost a lot of its purpose in regard to the economic profit-making capacity of the Portuguese. So the economy began to deteriorate, particularly after World War II. So in 1951, the Portuguese colonialists changed the status from being a colony to being part of the Portuguese overseas territories. Well, it's just another, perhaps more sophisticated way of saying that these people are still our colonial subjects. That happened after 1951.
Yeah.
And of course, with the independence movements taking place across Africa and Asia as well, and also some in Latin America, Cape Verde was swept up in that whole momentum of the post-World War II independence struggles. We talked about before the independence of Sudan in 1956, Ghana in 1957, Libya in 1951. There was the military coup led by Gamal Abdel Nasser and Mohammed Naguib in 1952, then the consolidation of power by Nasser in 1954 in Egypt, the nationalization of the Suez Canal in 1956. Then in Asia, of course, you had the war in Vietnam. After World War II, they were promised they would be allowed to hold a referendum and unite North and South Vietnam. Instead, France came in and tried to recolonize the northern areas of Vietnam, and they were defeated roundly in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. But that war continued for another 2 decades. But in specific regard to Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, and the other Portuguese colonies in Africa, they began to pick up momentum in regard to mobilizing for independence during the mid-1950s. In 1956, Amilcar Cabral and other Cape Verdeans and Bissauans formed the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde, for the independence of Guinea and Cape Verde.
Yeah.
PAIGC. That was formed in 1956. Because of the repressive atmosphere that existed in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, it functioned largely underground during its first few years. Then in 1959, there was a massacre of dock workers who were protesting for better wages and working conditions. After the massacre in 1959, by 1960, Cabral and the other leaders of the PAIGC began to send their leaders and cadres for military training in other countries. And in 1961, they opened up an armed struggle in Guinea-Bissau, and it was led by Amilcar Cabral and the others. And they made a rapid progress between 1961 up until 1972. In 1972, they pretty much controlled large swaths of territory in Guinea-Bissau. Most of the fighting took place on the mainland in Guinea-Bissau, although the Cape Verdeans were part of it. Cabral, in fact, it is said, was originally from Cape Verde, or at least part Cape Verdean, but he was able to unite the islanders with the people on the mainland. And he was an agricultural engineer, an agronomist. So the work he was doing for the Portuguese colonial authorities took him all across the country. He was able to observe and write. And if you read his book, Revolution in Guinea, a lot of it, the notes and a lot of the writings are based upon his observations during his work as an agricultural economist for the Portuguese colonial authorities. So by 1972, as I mentioned, they had pretty much taken over the entire country. Nonetheless, in January of 1973, Amilcar Cabral was assassinated. We had mentioned this in the previous episode when we talked about Guinea-Conakry, because he was killed in Guinea-Conakry. The PAIGC had opened up their headquarters in Conakry in 1960. So they had a lot of support from the Guinean Democratic Party, the PDG, founded and led by President Ahmed Sékou Touré. So in 1973, he was assassinated at their headquarters in Conakry. Apparently, there were some people who had been with the organization who had been imprisoned. Apparently, they were persuaded while they were in prison to assassinate Cabral. And they got out. They wanted to have a meeting with him. And during that meeting, he was assassinated. So this was a major blow to the PAIGC, a major blow to the Guinean government, because the headquarters of the PAIGC was in Conakry. Yet they continued to fight all during 1973. And by April of 1974, the Portuguese military forces were exhausted, and some lower-ranking military officers overthrew the government. And they, in fact, called it the Coronation Revolution.
Yeah.
And that was on April 25th of 1974. and they said that they wanted to move towards the decolonization of the colonies in Africa, as well as the colony of East Timor, which is in the Pacific, South Pacific. So this is a very, very interesting history because they won independence there in 1974 on the mainland, even prior to the winning of independence in Mozambique, as well as Angola and the others. And what happened was that eventually Cape Verde got its independence the following year. So you had the countries that were operating as a unit. The Cape Verde Islands and Guinea-Bissau were all part of one country. But unfortunately, by 1980, with the overthrow of Luis Cabral, who was the brother of Amilcar Cabral, there was a split inside the PAIGC, and Luis Cabral was overthrown in 1980, and he eventually went into exile in Cuba. So the overthrow of Luis Cabral and the split within the PAIGC led to the severing of ties between the Cape Verde Islands and the mainland.
Okay.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. So now, instead of being the PAIGC, which it still is in Guinea-Bissau, but in Cape Verde, it is called the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde.
Yes.
So that party is still in existence, but since 1990, the country has become what is considered a multi-party democracy. And that resulted as due to a split within the PAIGC, and another party was formed called the Movement for Democracy, and it's the democracy movement and the PAICV that are the main political parties right now in the Cape Verde Islands, and they have been exchanging administrations now for over 2 decades between the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde and the so-called Movement for Democracy.
And before we get into the different leaders and their legacy, I do have to ask. So when studying about Cape Verde, I'll let the audience know this. So basically, so the president is the head of state, and the president gets to choose who the prime minister is, and it's often a member of the same party. So think of the president of Cape Verde as, like in the U.S. or France, very powerful, and the prime minister as basically, their vice presidents, equally powerful. How do you assess the legacy, the socioeconomic legacy of Aristide Pereira and his prime minister Pedro Perez, and they ruled from 1975 to 1991? How do you assess both their domestic socioeconomic legacy and their foreign policy?
Well, one problem they faced was the economic situation inside of Cape Verde, the fact that it is largely an agricultural producing state, and the fact that it was no longer a colony of Portugal. So they had extreme economic challenges during the first decade and a half inside the country. They tended to have a progressive foreign policy, at least the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde does. But in terms of the movement for democracy, they're more to the right in regard to their political orientation. They consider themselves liberals, and they do not necessarily adhere to any form of socialism or social democracy. What has happened? But what has happened over the last several years is that because of the low population, it's approximately 600,000 people that inhabit all of those islands. And the largest one, Praia, which is where the capital is in Santiago Island, has the largest concentration of people. And they have had a huge boost in tourism. And that is one of the main revenue generators of foreign exchange inside the country. So the economy has improved. It's a low population, It heavily relies on tourism, and at the same time, there's a lot of people outside of Cape Verde in various parts of the world. Even here in the United States, there's a pretty significant Cape Verdean population. Even here in Detroit, I've met people who are from there years and years ago. There's numbers of them out on the East Coast as well. So the economy, according to the indexes that have been established by the IMF and the World Bank, is doing quite well. 7% annual growth rate. And at the same time, it has moved, at least its designation has been moved from a lesser developed country to a middle income country. They're on the verge of becoming what is considered a middle income country. Now, how the wealth is distributed is a whole different situation.
Exactly.
You know, if certain people are getting very wealthy and the masses are not, then you have to account for that in any type of economic or socioeconomic assessment
Well, I
of
could,
the Cape
and
Verde Islands. But
well, it's
it
and
is considered a success story as far as the West is concerned, and
yes, yes.
even as
Obama
far
even
as the
calls
academic.
ex-President Obama even calls Cape Verde the model of what Africa should be like. So yeah.
Sure.
But
Unlike
it's
Libya or Zimbabwe, which anti-imperialists, which he destroyed Libya, and he
and he
tried to
sanctioned the
destroy
hell out of
Syria.
Zimbabwe.
Exactly, maintained the sanctions, slandered the then leadership of President Mugabe in Zimbabwe. And those sanctions are still on Zimbabwe. Up until this day, they still have sanctions. And these sanctions have been in operation for the last quarter century, since uh, 2000.
That's interesting what you said that about the first ruling party of Cape Verde, and I'll also remind folks that that's actually yeah. Let me one moment. That's Aristide Pereira and Pedro Perez of the African People's Part yeah, of the sorry.
African Party for the Independence of
Yes, yeah,
Guinea and Cape Verde, then later African
yeah,
Party for
yeah.
the Independence of
African Party
Cape
for the
Verde. Yeah.
African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde. They are a member of Socialist International, but I do have to remind our audience that Socialist International, which is where the global center left, leftists, and even some strongly more left leaning parties meet to see how they can advance a global left agenda and help one another out. However, the organization sadly has been dominated by Western European and Nordic social democratic parties who have been guilty of supporting Western imperialism, and they themselves tend to be social imperialists. And since the late 70s and early 80s, many of those parties have pivoted to the hard right on their social on their own working class, their own domestic working class, and the same is true of its sister organization, Progressive Alliance. And many of the global South and those from non-European and the non-North American world often can be too influenced by this power dynamic and by the playbook of Western Euro Nordic social democratic left parties or fake left parties, if one even wants to be more critical than that. So after they've been in power, Antonio Montenegro and his prime minister Gual Alberto de Rosario, both of the Movement for Democracy Party or the MPD, Montenegro from March 1991 to March 2001, and he had two prime ministers who served under him, whom he appointed Carlos Viga and Gual Alberto de Rosario, apologies if I'm butchering his name, April 4th, 1991 to July 29th, 2000, and then Rosario, July 29th, 2000 to February 1st, 2001. And the MPD is a soft to arguably far right party in the African context. They believe in liberalism, which in the African context, you essentially believe in African capitalism, black capitalism, the free market, and liberal democracy, whose central economic system is the free market. And yes, very right leaning. They're a member of centrist Democrat International, which used to be called Christian Democrat International before 1991, and it's where many Christian Democrats and the People's parties. Very right wing organization. There's just no beating around the bush about it. Many Western European and Nordic center right parties and Christian Democratic parties are in this, like Fine Gael of Ireland, the far right Venezuelan parties, the New Democracy of Greece, the Christian Union Party of Germany, Belgium's Christian Democratic Union, and the Flemish version of that. Numerous right-leaning to far-right parties like PAN of Mexico, Kateb Vileng of Venezuela, of Lebanon, Spain's dominant right-wing party, the People's Party, and Portugal's Portuguese Social Democratic Party, but don't be misled by the name. It's a very right-wing party. Members of this organization. So, Abayomi, how do you assess the legacy of this party and its leaders on Cape Verde's domestic socioeconomics, and how do you assess their legacy when it comes to foreign policy? Stupid question. Any break from the previous right-leaning, supposedly left party, or largely a continuation?
Yeah, I would think that the advent of multi-party democracy after 1990 opened the way for the neoliberal agenda on the part of the MPD. And I think assessing that, of course, would be they have opened up the country for foreign investment, for tourism, and some light industry manufacturing inside the country. But no, it has not been allied with the anti-imperialist forces, the Pan-Africanist forces on the continent or internationally. So
And
yes, that is fairly centrist to right-wing political party. If their allies are people like the PAN in Mexico, which is very pro-U.S., although they're considered to be liberals within the spectrum, political spectrum of Mexico, it's still very much allied with the United States.
exactly. And then after their time in power came Pedro Perez, president of Cape Verde from late March 2001 to early September 2011, and the prime minister who served under him was Jose Maria Neves, both of the African Party for Independence of Cape Verde. So the left makes a comeback, or do they? What's your assessment of their legacy on Cape Verde's domestic socioeconomic affairs, as well as their foreign policy?
I think they pretty much maintain the same foreign policy in regard to being investment friendly. And the fact that they've been designated as a middle income country, of course, they're not going to change too much if you compare it with the development issues on other African countries. But people have to keep in mind it's a very small population there, largely due to the Atlantic slave trade and colonialism. And as a result of that, the resources in which they get, of course, are distributed in a better way, a more equitable way than when you have countries with large populations. Also, the educational system, too, has been improved there. They are said to have one of the best primary and secondary educational systems on the African continent. But I think also this is related to the small population that exists in Cape Verde. So I don't see any real radical departure on the part of either party in regard to international as well as domestic affairs.
And that's a perfect segue to Jorge Carlos Fonseca, served as president of Cape Verde from early September 2011 to early November 2021, and the MPD make a comeback. Now, I'm a bit confused here, but I think, unless I'm wrong, he actually had Jose Maria Neves of the African Party for Independence of Cape Verde as his prime minister, which would be the first time such a power sharing arrangement took place between the two rival parties. How do you assess this time in office and the legacy of that these two men left for Cape Verde's vast majority working class slash working poor, and even the chronically unemployed, etc.?
Yeah, well, usually when that happens, when you have a government, a president, for example, from one party and a prime minister from another party, it's usually because of the outcome of the elections are close. And rather than go into a huge sectarian political fight, they work out a power sharing arrangement inside the country. And that's happened in other states. For example, in Kenya, the recent death of Raila Odinga in Kenya is a manifestation of this situation, although the internal political situation is by no means as aggravated and as tense in Cape Verde as it is in Kenya. But there have been times where they've had coalition governments in Kenya, and they've of course had one in Cape Verde as well.
But and nothing really changed under these two gentlemen. Same sort of, yeah.
A neoliberal approach, emphasis on tourism, agricultural exports. Yes.
And then now a complete switch around happens. So currently, since November the 8th, 2021 to this present moment, Cape Verde is under the presidency of Jose Maria Neves of the African Party for Independence. But his prime minister of the MPD is, and I'm going to be butchering his name, so apologies in advance for that, is, I believe, Ulysses Correa Silva, who, and he's been in office as prime minister since late April 2016. I was a bit confused about that, but this is what happens when you read from Wikipedia. But that aside, Abayomi, how do you assess this current government of Cape Verde and its relation to the poor majority, and its relation with Western imperial governments like Portugal, the US, the UK, France, Canada, EU, NATO, and its relations with BRICS, if there's any to even speak of?
Yes, the policy of the country from its inception has been non-alignment. So they're attempting to get along with not only the former imperialist countries, but also to get along with the countries that are part of BRICS and the socialist states as well. And one main issue that they have been dealing with is the fact that they've been also accused of being a main hub for illegal drug trafficking to Europe as well as to the Western Hemisphere. So they have been involved in several projects trying to curtail the drug trafficking that's been taking place in some of the areas in the Cape Verde Islands. So this is a major problem. It can also open up create an atmosphere for U.S. intervention. We saw in Venezuela what's been happening over the last few weeks, where they've been bombing these small boats claiming that they're carrying drugs into the United States, which is, to me, highly, highly improbable. The drug business in the U.S. is huge, and people in the United States consume more narcotics than any other country in the world. So I don't think bringing it over in boats, small boats like that, is clearly not the main suppliers of, for example, cocaine or other drugs, illegal drugs, mainly narcotics. So I think that most of those drugs are probably brought via ships or through cargo planes, not necessarily small boats in the Caribbean. So Cape Verde has to deal with this question. Otherwise, they can open up themselves to further U.S. Military intervention. There was a diplomatic row between the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and Cape Verde when an envoy of Venezuela was held there for a substantial period of time at the aegis of the United States, claiming that he had violated some type of U.S. laws.
Wasn't that the Alex Saab scandal?
Yeah.
And he eventually, thanks to people power movements and his tireless lawyer, was eventually freed. But yeah, I believe he was detained by the authorities of Cape Verde, and then
yeah, on behalf of the U.S. imperialists.
Yeah, extradited back to Miami, which is a far right central for the for the Latin American far right expat community, correct?
Exactly, and also for organized crime as well. The mafia elements that have operated there for decades and decades. So it's really ironic that the United States is accusing the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela of being responsible for the narcotics problem inside the United States, when in fact, many of the people that they're aligned with here in this country have a history in regard to organized crime involvement. So it's such an irony that these type of accusations are being made against the government in Venezuela, when in fact the U.S. is the major consumer of narcotics, opiates, cocaine, methamphetamines. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry here in the United States, and they're accusing migrants of being at the source of this problem. But that could not be true because the people that consume these illegal substances are people who are citizens of the United States or permanent residents of the United States, but mainly citizens of the United States, many of whom have never even traveled outside the country since they were born. So it's absolutely amazing that they would be trying to attribute the internal domestic drug problem in the United States with people who are migrants who are here mainly to try to make a living because
Which
their
no doubt,
economy
and
in their
which
own countries have been destroyed.
which no doubt the CIA most likely is probably is probably the one that's distributing all of those
Well, of
drugs,
course, that was in the
and the crooks in the FBI.
1990s. Remember, the 1990s, that was a major scandal that they were distributing crack cocaine and other drugs in Black communities and taking the resources, the profits, and turning it over to the counter-revolutionaries in Nicaragua.
Exactly.
So this is the reality. In the 1980s, 1990s, all this was going on inside the United States.
And then well and I have to ask this, and apologies if it's a bit of a repetitive question. Historically, how was Cape Verde's relations with Western imperial governments like Portugal, the U.S., the U.K., France, Canada, EU, NATO, as well as the USSR, China, Eastern European communist nations, Vietnam, North Korea, and Cuba? And was it tied? What was it tied with one side over the other, or did it try to have detente with both blocks and be non-aligned? And answer that question before we talk a little bit more about BRICS.
In the early years, between 1975 and 1990, the tendency was more towards the countries of Eastern Europe, the non-capitalist and socialist-oriented countries in Africa, the Soviet Union. But since 1990, with the collapse of the Comecon countries in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world, and the total collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991, the emphasis on non-alignment has been great. And also, they still have good economic and diplomatic relations with the former colonial power of Portugal in Lisbon as well. A lot of tourism and investment from Portugal is still flowing into the Cape Verde Islands.
Interesting. And what's Cape Verde's relations with BRICS, if there's any, and any historical relations with BRICS that has been positive for the island and will be as long as Western imperialism doesn't try to sabotage it as they often do? Very curious your response.
Yeah, I don't think their economy is large enough to be integrated into the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa plus summit. I'm sure they would be interested in developing some type of affiliation with BRICS. But at this stage, I don't think their economy is large enough, even though it's doing relatively well in comparison to other economies on the African continent, on the mainland. But no, I'm not familiar with any real links or any efforts on the part of Cape Verde to join the BRICS summit.
And what's been Cape Verde's response to the West African anti-French Spring that's been happening mostly in Western Africa, and its relations to U.S.-led imperialism and pan-European imperialism when it comes to AFRICOM as an effort to continue Western imperial neocolonial stranglehold on the continent of Africa.
Yeah, I think that the anti-French sentiment has been heavily confined to the former French colonies, for example, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and also Senegal. The Cape Verde Islands are still part of the economic community of West African states. They're still affiliated with them, just like the former affiliate, Guinea-Bissau, on the mainland. So they still relate to ECOWAS. I'm not sure of any type of diplomatic initiative or efforts to strengthen ties with the Alliance of Sahel States. That's Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, which have broken with the economic community of West African states. And the reason why they broke was because ECOWAS was being used in an attempt to invade Niger. This took place in 2023 after the July 26th revolution there, led by the CNSP. And Nigeria, which was chair of ECOWAS during that time period, was approached by France and the United States in an effort to mobilize a defense force that, of course, would be led and coordinated and armed and given intelligence assistance by the United States and France. But it fell apart even before it got started, because even people in Nigeria, even within the ruling party there, the APC, opposed the president at the time, Tinubu, Bola Tinubu, who was still president. He had just gotten in office when all this developed, opposed his willingness to invade the neighboring country of Niger. And Niger, of course, is very rich with uranium, and they're in the process right now of restructuring the uranium industry in Niger, just as in Mali, they're trying to restructure the mining industry there as well, and as it relates to gold and other strategic metals and minerals. And the same situation is happening in Burkina Faso as well. So I don't think they're part of the anti-French movement that's taking place on the continent, because their former colonizer is Portugal. And Portugal still is a very key player in the economic life of Cape Verde, and they still speak Portuguese. Portuguese is the official language of the people on the Cape Verde Islands, these 600,000 people who now live there.
Yes, and Portugal, unfortunately, despite quite a radical revolution, or certainly a
50
great
years ago,
social
yeah.
or certainly a great social upheaval that which was the Coronation Revolution, Portugal, unfortunately, and we even saw that with Spain when although, well, actually, Spain's a bit different. Spain's a bit different, but we also saw that when fascism ended and Spain became a classical liberal democracy, the left, unfortunately, made a Faustian pact by joining the European Union, still staying members of NATO. Same thing with Greece. Same thing with Greece and Cyprus. They had these great social upheavals against their far right military dictatorships, and yet they still decided to be members of NATO and join the European Union, which is a very neoliberal and soft pan-European imperialist organization. So
Exactly. And the problem that they have is that the ruling parties, for example, Syriza, that was elected in Greece several years ago, they were elected on the platform of refusal to pay the debt because Greece was swamped by financial institutions that were demanding payment. They had to impose all types of austerity measures, massive layoffs, cut back in government services. Syriza was elected with a pretty hefty margin and mandate to address this crisis, and they did not have the nerve, the political nerve, to do so. Because the West, what they can do, they can shut down all economic transactions. They could even prevent people from withdrawing money from their bank accounts. So you have to be in a position politically to say, okay, even if we have to shut the country down for a period of time, we're willing to do that. Like what happened in China after the revolution in 1949. There was 30 years where there was very little outside involvement in the People's Republic of China, particularly from the West. And they realized that this is not going to work. So they wanted to open up China, thinking that by opening up China, they could destroy it through capitalists and Western influence. And in fact, what has happened is that the Chinese economy has grown to an extent that they're on the verge of surpassing the United States. In some areas, it's my belief that they have already surpassed the United States in terms of clean energy development, in regard to their military prowess, their manufacturing capacity, and also technological advancements.
Although, however, China has its own currency, and Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, the pigs of Europe, and also many of those Eastern European countries, which fell for a lot of the propaganda that if you join the European Union, everything's going to be all hunky dory and
Right.
so forth like that. And well, giving up their national currency and joining the European and joining the euro, having the euro as their currency. By law, the European Union says that you cannot run deficits. You cannot, when your economy hits a brick wall, you cannot do massive nationalization or anything like that. And oh my gosh! We're probably going to have to talk about the European Union. That's a whole other topic for another day. It's
Exactly.
a really fascinating subject because
It
the
is.
European Union, if you take off all the blinders and take off all of the propaganda that you hear about the European Union, and you push aside the bigotry and the far right nonsense that was Brexit and so forth like that, the European Union is to its core liberal democracy, neoliberalism, and so forth. And while it looks great on paper, oh, that's so awesome that if I just have a European passport and I can go from Spain and pay my euros from Spain to Belgium and so forth. It looks
Yes.
great on paper, and in short term when you're traveling, it's great. But when it comes to sovereignty, actual national sovereignty, and radical socialism, there is no room for any of that in the European Union. And
Yeah.
and in fact, to to connect this actually to Cape Verde, uh, the classical awfulness colonialism. So I remember reading what was that guy's name? The guy who did the Open Veins of Latin America.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay, so I okay
Hugo
okay
Chavez gave, I think he gave a copy of the book to Barack Obama
exactly
when he
exactly
showed up
okay.
at the
So
OAS. Yeah, right.
okay, so in that book, which I do recommend people read
Yes,
because it's quite a fascinating read. Okay, so
right.
in that book, the author, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but the author of that book said the following: said that Venezuela was made to be an oil country. Venezuela, if who knows, but if Venezuela had its own just radical sovereignty and was not at the behest of both the Spanish and later Western imperialism, Venezuela could have made their economy something else. But it was made to be an oil producing country. So then you have other
Yes,
countries in Latin America which were made to be a sugar producing country or a coca producing country and so forth like that. They've done more or less kind of the same thing with I think the Western imperialists and the scramble of Africa more or less did that
exactly.
with Africa.
They
And
did.
if you look at the European Union and how some economies are developed, Germany is the powerhouse. that can do whatever it wants with its economy, because they're like more or less the people who more or less call all the shots in the
Right.
European Union. Greece, Portugal, Spain, Cyprus were made to be the cheap tourist industry hotspots that they are. And that, of course, brings a lot of problem, because tourism is a very, very precarious industry. There's
It is.
moments where you have lots of people who come travel to your country, with the hotels and going to the local cafes and stuff like that, and the restaurants. But the moment there's what we call a tourism dry spell, because of winter or anything like that, or because other people's economies are not doing good. Ergo people have to come back on traveling. For countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, and to a degree, Cyprus and so forth, it is awful for them, which is why you have like these awful booms and busts when it comes to tourism. And they've done even the same thing with other island nations like Cape Verde, Jamaica,
Yes.
Trinidad, and so forth. So I'm very curious your response on that before I actually ask another question related to Cape Verde. I'm very curious your response to that.
Yes, that is a problem. You have the whole international division of power and the whole international division of labor. And that applies to Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia, as well as Africa. So you have countries that have been designated to produce certain commodities. You have others that are mining hubs, and some countries encompass both. For example, Ghana, which was formerly known as the Gold Coast, produced a lot of gold as well as cocoa production. And now, though, they're also producing oil in Ghana. So we see a shift or a combination of both agricultural commodity production for export as well as strategic resources such as oil and natural gas and other minerals and metals. Same thing with Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, a former French colony. It's known as the Ivory Coast. It is today, I believe, still the world's largest producer of cocoa, yet it's also producing oil. Oil was discovered a couple of decades ago, and they've been producing oil. They have an oil workers union there, which has been involved in industrial actions. So yeah, it's beginning to diversify in many ways. Even Cape Verde, for example, is starting to produce certain types of minerals for export. So it can be both during this stage. You can have Mexico, for example, they produce oil as well, but the agricultural sector of the economy has been largely destroyed because of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then the successor to NAFTA. And that is what fueled migration into the United States, is because U.S. imperialism, working with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, have destroyed the agricultural economies of countries, for example, Mexico and other Central American states, those which were known as, quote, the banana republics. A lot of those people are not working in agriculture now, and a lot of them have migrated to the United States, and they're using that as an excuse for the militarization of the cities, the denial of fundamental bourgeois democratic rights. You see what's going on now in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. It is absolutely horrendous. And they're threatening to send the military into other cities. They've sent them into Memphis. So yes, they're using these the downsides, for example, of the imperialist economic policies of the United States to justify the imposition of more undemocratic practices to the point of a fascist dictatorship. Right now in the United States, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, is recruiting people, even on national television. They're offering $50,000 bonuses to anyone who would join ICE And in their commercials, they're saying they're not just focusing on immigration or people who have immigration issues. They're also concerned about drug trafficking, gangs, and other forms of criminality.
Wow.
So this leaves it wide open for them to attack any neighborhood, any community, any apartment building, any flat, any home, under the guise they're fighting drug trafficking or criminal gangs. And we saw what happened in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. People have been fighting battles in Chicago in the streets almost every day over the last week. So it's totally outrageous, but they have created this problem. And right now, they're trying to correct the problem by instituting more harsher forms of authoritarian rule in the United States. And this is going to be happening in the European Union and the UK as well, because we see the march of the right wing in the UK, with that Unite the Kingdom rally they had about a month or so ago that brought 150,000 far-right neo-fascists into the streets to do battle, not only with the anti-racist forces, but also with the police. Same thing happened in the Netherlands. Look at France. You have a far right-wing party of Marine Le Pen there.
In fact, this will horrify you. The next Dutch elections are going to be full, and the far actually it was a center right to far right coalition that happened in the Netherlands, which actually collapsed. But there's been lots of xenophobic
Yeah.
rallies where the far right, supporters of supporters of Kurt Wilders and other far right parties have all been gathering together, and they were waving this flag, which I said, wow, the colors on that flag look kind of nice. But the Al Jazeera reporter from the Netherlands was saying that we've been, we've been seeing people at these rallies, waving, neo-Nazis and fascist flags and stuff like that. So then me and my father, my father's from the Netherlands. So we were looking at, some of these kind of like orange, white, and blue flags that some of these far right Dutch people were waving, and then my father was like, "Oh yeah, no, these are far right symbols. In fact, some of those symbols was the flag, the flag of apartheid South Africa from the 1920s up to 1994 was the blue,
Right.
white, and
Yes.
the orange, white, and blue flag, and even on that flag had the Dutch flag and the Union Jack on top of that. And these are what some of
Wow.
these far right folks who are saying the Netherlands is full. We don't want immigration. We're tired of subsidizing for refugees. It's just
Exactly.
wow.
Yeah.
Like
This is what's going on across Europe, and it's being fueled by the migration crisis, which is direct result of imperialist wars, of regime change and occupation that's taking place in West Asia and in Africa. So they only have themselves to blame. And also the neoliberal policies that have been imposed internationally have driven down wages. They have caused massive layoffs in the public sector as well as the private sector. So that's why you have this flood of people that are going into Europe, the UK, as well as into the United States. They don't give a reason why all these people are fleeing their countries. But at the same time, it's their fault. It's the fault of imperialism that all this is going on. And this has actually created the conditions for the rise of these far right parties, Reform UK,
yeah,
the National Rally in France, and the others, and even the MAGA Republicans here in the United States. There's xenophobia, and they want to return North America and Europe back to what they see as the good old days when they could dictate race relations, where unions were not as strong, and where,
exactly.
of course, you had to bow down to white men in particular, and act in reverence of white men. And that's why you look at Donald Trump's government today, and it's 99.9% whites, mainly white men, some white women, one Asian FBI director who looks terrified every time there's a crisis because he knows his head is going to be on the chopping block if something happens.
Oh,
You
by
know,
the way,
yeah,
the historian, the historian whose name I was blanking out, Eduardo Galeano. He was the author
right.
of Open Veins of Latin America, and I actually really do suggest people
Did he come from
check out.
Uruguay?
Yes, I believe so. I believe so.
Mhm.
In fact, I'll even double check very
Yeah,
quickly. Yes, yes, yes. From Uruguay. Uruguay. Yeah,
yeah. It's
yeah.
been a very popular book, and he would meet and have conversations with the late Fidel Castro, the former leader of revolutionary Cuba. So yes, but Cape Verde, we'll see what happens over the next few years. They're being championed and hailed by the international financial community as making substantial progress. But all that can change if you look at the tariff regime that Trump has imposed and the real threat of world war, which I believe can take place if the right set of circumstances are not resolved. For example, the war in Ukraine, the growing tensions between the People's Republic of China and the United States, Iran, the situation in Palestine, which doesn't look like there's going to be any long term peace settlement there because people are still being killed in Gaza. So we'll see what happens. But I think Cape Verde will be a testing ground for the future of neoliberalism and world imperialism.
And anything you'd like to add on Cape Verde? And despite betrayals, setbacks, mistakes, when governments calling themselves of the left, when in power, not pursuing policies that could have immensely helped the majority, working class, working poor, and chronically unemployed, does Cape Verde have a strong left wing movement? And any final thoughts you want to share about how, if the nation really wanted to overcome the scourge that is uh, extreme poverty and all the terrible ills that come with it, people living in destitution, squalor, that the only way to eradicate it really is, African socialism, Pan Africanist socialism, Marxism or barbarism, or the endless misery that is austerity? I'm very curious your response on that.
Yeah, I think the origins of the PAIGC and the PAICV, people such as Amilcar Cabral, for example, a great writer, a great analyst. People should reread his books, Revolution in Guinea, which came out, I believe, in 1969, then later Return to the Source, which was published posthumously, includes speeches that he delivered in the United States during 1972, during his visit to the States and the United Nations. So I think, yes, they have a tradition of left wing politics, Pan Africanist politics, which they need to return to. And Cape Verde, of course, with Amilcar Cabral being a Cape Verdean as well as a Guinea Bissawian, I think provides a good roadmap on how to build socialism in Africa. And people should read his books and they should try to apply his ideas to the concrete realities that we're facing right now, because it's clear that the world capitalist system is indeed crisis. That's why they're imposing all these tariffs. They're escalating their hostility towards the global South. They, of course, want to raise the limits for military expenditures all throughout the United Kingdom and the European Union. So there is no solution within the world capitalist system. The only real solution is to move towards non-capitalist development, towards socialism, and that's the only solution. Even the climate crisis, which Cape Verde has been very much interested in, because there are a series of islands, and they're arid. A lot of the territory, a lot of the land on these islands are arid. So they're having problems even developing or continuing to develop their agricultural industry because the lack of rainfall and the arid environmental conditions in Cape Verde. So all this has to be addressed. And it's the imperialist countries that are the main contributors of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. The Pentagon, it's studies that have been done that indicate that they are the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Although they want to blame China, but China is way behind in terms of the destruction of the planet if you compare it to the United States, the UK, and the European Union.
And bonus question. Actually, I have to ask about Cape Verde before we end. Now, Cape Verde is home to one of the island and all of Africa's greatest musical cultural export, and that is Cesaria Evaria. What's your assessment of her and her music is often known for songs about love, heartache, longing for home and a sense of belonging, nostalgia, or saudade, as it's known in Brazilian Portuguese. But was she known to be part of radical left movement in Cape Verde or Pan Africanist leftism, or was she mostly apolitical and her music you use for escapism and if a particular mental health issue is arising, from unrequited love or bad love, did she or did she use her music often to protest injustices and bigotry amongst her people like Franco of Congo, Fela Kuti of Nigeria, or Miriam Makeba and many other of Makeba's South African peers, at least during the period of apartheid? I'm very curious your response.
Yeah, I think she falls into a different category. She's Pan Africanist from the standpoint that the music she produced had continental as well as international ramifications. People loved her music, and they, of course, you heard it being played, 20, 25 years ago at parties where you had African expatriates and others would attend. So I think that from that standpoint,
I think there's a phone going on that you have to.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay.
Hey, you were saying.
Maybe you can edit that out.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, so I think from the standpoint of her appeal across the African continent and her music, it's really hard to categorize. I mean, it sounds like jazz, sounds like blues. And also, West African music like palm oil music that they played in Nigeria and Ghana. So I think the influences are Pan-Africanists in their orientation. But yes, she really put the Cape Verdean music on the map.
But mostly fair to say apolitical, even if she herself may have expressed solidarity to South Africa or yeah, or something like that. Correct.
Yes, yeah, I think her appeal is cultural, and that she did a lot to inform people about the traditions of Cape Verde. And I believe her father was also a musical composer. And I don't think she set out necessarily to become a musician or a singer, but by singing, a lot of people admired her voice and her music. And of course, she became an international phenomenon. Unfortunately, she passed away almost 14 years ago, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, in end of 2011. So yes.
Okay. Well, we were joined on this all things Africa edition, learning about the history and the current affairs of Cape Verde with our always wonderful returning champion, the historian, journalist, and Pan-Africanist leftist, and all-round anti-imperialist in support of all people power movements, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and all of his appearances on 1+1. Subscribe to both Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Donate generously to them. And don't forget to do the same for 1+1 and donate to us. And please, again, share widely all of 1+1's content and encourage others to like us and, again, share and donate. The next country we'll be exploring is Liberia. But next week, we won't be doing a 1+1 because I have a concert to go to that Friday, which conflicts with the time that we often do 1+1, going to see the electro swing house techno group Stellar. But we'll be back with our regular program October 31st, where we'll explore the history and current affairs of Liberia, which is going to be quite an epic one. So, folks, do find yourself a very comfortable chair because that's a long history that we're going to be diving into. All my best until then. Have a great weekend, folks. Good night and good luck. And rest in peace to the following: Robert Redford, Diane Keaton, Ace Frehley. But an extra special rest in peace to D'Angelo. Thank you for all the brown sugar you gave us and for so many times during very hard times helping me to find my smile again.
Yeah.
And
And also, congratulations to the football team in Cape Verde for qualifying for the 2030 FIFA World Cup.
oh, that's wonderful.
So you have to get a T-shirt with the Cape Verde colors.
And also
Not the shirt, yeah.
and also grazie Bella of Italy for kicking Israel out of their qualifications for the World Cup. So
Exactly. Exactly.
and
Yeah.
again, rest in peace and all my love to D'Angelo. Great music and taken from us way too soon. All my best until then, folks. And as always, Abayomi, thank you so much for the time you give us. And yeah, and take care, everyone.